All right, well, let's get started. I think I'll watch for the LinkedIn folks. But the streaming doesn't seem to have been started yet, so we'll see what we can do there.
Cool. That's good.
All right, so morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. We are live. Welcome to Estuary's Data Engineering podcast series, where we're going to try and focus on delivering on how people actually deliver real-time pipelines and the analytics around them, or the operational analytics, or the customer-facing analytics that we'll get into, and maybe even some AI projects. But we'll really just try to answer the questions people have been asking us. I'm Rob Meyer. I'm going to be the chief host today. And when we got this whole thing started, we'd been asked a few times about how different ETL tools compare and how people actually use them to build pipelines and where they struggle. So we thought we'd bring on a couple of folks that have actually used several tools, and in this case, 4 tools at the same time. So I want to welcome the co-founders of Eyeball Division, Andrew James, who's the CEO, and Chase Cottle, who's the CTO. Welcome, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excited to chat about this.
Yeah, me too. So at a high level, we thought it'd be great to hear about your lessons learned. That's what was coming up when we started this conversation for building the pipelines and the analytics, both for some of the internal analytics and pipelines that you built, but also what you've built for your new business for Cerebro. So we were hoping to get some tips, maybe for advertising analytics as well, because I know that I suck at it and I can use some help. But we've gotten some other questions in the meantime, and so I'm going to pepper those in throughout the conversation. But before we start, I want to get some housekeeping done here. So first, please ask questions. We're here for you. If you're in Zoom, please make sure you've got your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. If you're on LinkedIn, I'm going to keep watching and see if I can get that live feed going. But please keep asking on LinkedIn, and I'll try to get the questions answered. Comment if you're having any issues. I'll try and help while I'm also asking some questions. So Andrew and Chase, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, excited to go nerdy today. I don't always get to talk about this stuff. So spend a lot of time on the business. When's this going to be done? How much does it cost? Don't overbore me with the details. So it's fun to talk about this more in-depth technical side of it, and to get to hear you and Chase banter will be good for me too.
Well, startups are all about rolling up your sleeves, so let's get going. I was curious if you could give us a little bit of background on the history of Eyeball Division and Cerebro, and great names, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I bought my first ad probably 15 years ago online. Maybe not true. I think my first real ad was a piece of paper on a mailbox to get somebody to let me mow their lawn or something like that. But, you know, when eBay was new, when AdWords was new, when people used to say things like the information superhighway, I was living in the house of an HP engineer, and that led to me playing with ads as they kind of came out online. And so remember the 5-cent click days on Google, those kinds of things. And over the last 15 years, I've mostly been playing that game, which exposes you to all kinds of different industries, all kinds of different business models, and all kinds of data. And probably 10 years ago, we started trying to buy a data solution. You know, the first thing I used was something like HyperTracker, and it gave you your own pixel. You could sometimes successfully place, and sometimes it would work. And sometimes you kind of knew how many people hit your link and went somewhere. And then, you know, we'd buy all kinds of different tools and just could never get classic story, right? Could never get exactly what I needed and wanted to connect every penny in ad spend to every dollar in profit at a level of granularity I could do something about. And so started to shift focus toward which tools in the ecosystem that I'm already using or understand how they work could I build on top of and figure out how to make exactly what we want. Because I basically thought, if I just get this problem solved, you know, this week, this month, this quarter, it'll be done. And then I can get back to making money with ads, right? I can turn off the bad ones, turn on the good ones, go spend more, make more. And it turns out solving evolving data problems at scale, there's a lot more to it than that. And so that's when Chase kind of came in. he learned ads from me super early on, but I distinctly remember, I actually remember where I was. I didn't tell you this beforehand. So my wife surprised me with this Coldplay tickets birthday thing, and we stayed in a hotel near the thing. We have this like heated conversation with an employee, and there's one day I called Chase and I said, I need you to just become the CTO, and we need to go build what this is. Like, I don't know how old were you? You were maybe like 23. And
Yeah, something like that.
yeah, and I
So
just you
just a
just
couple
need to
years
kind of
ago.
take that on and just like take on like you're the CTO now, and you need to take on that identity, and you need to become what we need to build what we both see here. And I mean, I'll be forever grateful and indebted to him for taking the tallest order at the time for him, leap of faith to just go be that person and fully step into a role where, I mean, it's really quite impressive, some of the things we've found out. And we keep wondering, like, are we at the edges of the map? Does somebody else know how this works? And then folks like you ask us to talk about what we've done, and we find out, oh, maybe we're not idiots, you know? And so I still kind of have that spirit from the very beginning of, well, how do I make this spreadsheet? Tell me the answer.
Yeah. Great. So maybe, and by the way, we did get LinkedIn Live working. I'm at least technical enough to do that.
Look at
So,
us.
so I was wondering, Chase, what did that look like once you started taking over? Like, what was your job at the beginning? And then what did you build as the first pipeline for this?
Yeah, so we started primarily everything was in Google Sheets, and I spent my first 6 hours of I did it every other day because it took so long of just I'd pull all the data from like these different Facebook accounts and Google accounts and normalize it and put it into a spreadsheet, and then I'd pull all the conversion data and click data and normalize that, and then I would write VLOOKUPs to do a basic join to pull data across from each other, and then I would come up with this custom dashboard that had the metrics the way we wanted them and the way we wanted to calculate it. And we would say the CPA on this ad was that and XYZ, and then we would spend, 60 to 90 minutes making a decision. And then we'd wait a couple days till we had more data. We do that over and over again. So the goal originally was like, this should really be automated. We're spending so much time pulling in all the data, formatting it, getting it to a place that we can actually make decisions rather than just making as many correct decisions as we can and moving forward faster. So that was kind of the original piece of it. And I think a lot of companies are still in that space with their own advertising, which is where we tend to go help out of like, we can just automate all this for you and make this nice and pretty out of the box. So I did a bunch of Googling and just found out and stumbled upon Stitch data as the original one that we started playing with. I think it was like $100 to get started per month or something like that. And we could throw a credit card on there and just play around with it.
Mhm.
And a few clicks later, I had Facebook data coming out of something. And then uh, we had bought Tableau that we thought would solve all of our issues, let us just magically connect everything together. But then we didn't realize that we had to, go get all the raw data and clean it and make it so that we could actually tie it together. And so yeah, we used Tableau and Stitch, and we were able to connect to our Redshift instance that we had some of our conversion data in, and use Tableau's joins to tie it all together and build some of our first iterations of automatically updating dashboards that way.
Okay. And you didn't mention the data warehouse. So um, which one was it?
It was
Google
Redshift is what we
Sheets.
started with.
Okay. Well, Google
Well,
Sheets is a database. That's fair. It's the number one. Okay, we're done here. We're done. But I was curious, the order in which you started too. Like, how did you? Was it you? Were you building what you wanted first, and then building your way back? Did you kind of think about the data you needed to use? Were there some processes you had in mind? How did this work?
yeah, so there's a little bit of evolution there where we had a developer who was kind of like learning to be a full stack developer, but was probably a little more front end focused. And he was able to connect to the API of one of our core systems to pull some data out for us
Mhm.
and like get it into Postgres, but it wasn't super reliable or super good. And we saw that based on the volume of data, we were probably going to run into issues. So we pretty
Mhm.
quickly switched over to Redshift since
Yep.
it was very similar in the same ecosystem where everything else was hosted and running in a way that we could kind of continue to function. So we had that working, although it wasn't a perfect pipeline in the beginning. So I had some data in Redshift, and then I was able to just have Stitch throw Facebook and Google data in the beginning into Redshift and join a couple tables together and get that to work. And then there was a lot of learnings of like one-to-one versus many-to-one or one-to-many relationships, and how you deal with those and how you deal with levels of granularity, and a bunch of workarounds that we figured out with Tableau because of level of detail calculations. Like really, really relied on Tableau as a crutch because I didn't know SQL. I couldn't actually write uh, reasonable SQL queries. So that's kind of how we got it off the ground, and then pretty quickly iterated from there into some of the other components that we have now.
Yeah, I mean, it's very common. It's the analytics that are the most important things. So why not work from the front back? So then what? How did it evolve?
Yep. So basically at that point, everyone just wants all of their data to be that way. They want everything to be automated. So it's kind of a tear of sources at that point. It's like, I want Google, I want YouTube, I want Pinterest, just think of every advertising channel at the time. There's a few less then than there are now. And that basically led us to start exploring other ETL options because Stitch only had so many options. And we ran into some issues there where you couldn't automatically configure something. You couldn't like set up a template of here's how I want Facebook data to be pulled in. And I couldn't give somebody a link to go authenticate their Facebook account and sync their data to push it all through like programmatically. So we had to start evolving things that way to where that led us to Fivetran, basically. At the time, if I'm remembering correctly, too, Fivetran was cheaper because they used to price per connector. So it was like X dollars per year per connector, regardless of data volume. So for us, it was like, well, let's just move all of Facebook and Google over there. And it was, $6,000 a year, something like that, to get as much Google and Facebook data as we wanted. And we still had the onboarding component that was difficult and the standardization component that was difficult. But we at least, could normalize it to some degree. So
In and out
we
was
did that for
automated.
a while. And then later on, they added Powered by Fivetran, which is the main reason we still use them, because we can set up a template and we have a page where we can give our users a auth token and they can go sync their data without us ever having to touch anything. And then that rolls into our whole ecosystem and all of our data models and normalization.
Okay.
It's worth saying
yeah.
too, there's definitely a handful of connectors in the GitHub graveyard that we built ourselves, paid someone to build, some that worked, some that we still depend on. There's those too. There's some that are core to what we deliver that we own and control end to end completely that nobody has, and we don't care if they have them. So, it became an allocation of resources kind of a problem, and became kind of a bit of an algorithm in Chase's head as to which tool, be it a developer or an internal tool to build ETLs, or this ETL pipeline tool to use for which source. And we re-underwrite it frequently because the landscape changes frequently.
So you have some of your own custom taps you're maintaining.
Totally.
With Stitch, yeah. And then with Tableau, you're using data extracts, I guess. So you've got some pipeline magic there as well. Is that right?
Yeah, we do use extracts primarily. We are lucky in the sense that fast or close to real-time data for advertising is like an hour delay is fast, right? From a latency perspective. So we don't have to have the sub 100 milliseconds that you all deal with for database to database transformations and transfers. So we can get away with extracts, and there tends to be a lot of data enrichment required to pull it all through because nobody knows what ad ID 642347 is, right? Like you need to do all the enrichment to the other tables to pull in names and images and values and things that are actually useful for the visualization. So I don't know what the count of tables is, but it's a very, very large left join type situation of a lot of enrichment data being pulled into the core data set.
So kind of a bunch of dimension tables off your fact table, basically, with all this information. Okay.
Yep.
Now we started talking, So what changed again?
So Fivetran's pricing changed a little bit. That's part of it.
Okay.
And some of the negotiation and contracts there became difficult to predict how, what is this going to cost if we add XYZ component. Um, we still give them a lot of money and still like them. But there's certain pieces of how their integration works that makes it difficult to run.
Mhm.
So I was given a link to a tweet from Lauren Balick, I think, and
Yeah, she's
she was
great.
doing like a free, hey, hop on a phone call and I'll just review stuff with you for free.
Yeah.
And basically said there's a lot of really, really good alternatives to Fivetran. So I
Mhm.
chatted with her, and Estuary was her number one recommendation, and Portable is the second recommendation, depending on what the sources of data that you need.
Mhm.
And then I hopped on and started that immediately. What we settled on for Estuary that's really great is all the database to database or data warehouse transfers.
Mhm.
And we had a client in an enterprise situation where they were using BigQuery. All of our stuff is primarily in Redshift. And from a cost effective and speed to implementation, because we could have built the connector from our side, it was just so much faster ROI overall to use Estuary. And that's where we started playing with it. And I think we'll probably move more workloads over to Estuary because it's a simple, you pay per gigabyte and
Mhm.
for hours run, it's much easier to predict in terms of data volume and what it's going to cost.
Mhm. So now you mentioned BigQuery, you mentioned a couple other databases. I'm kind of curious what changed on the business side where you're adding all these things. So maybe Andrew, you can take that one.
I mean, our core thesis was, can we price what we said? I think an important innovation that I like to talk about with our end users, and this is user facing. Um, if you need someone to build an analytics solution for you, and that solution is not an internal BI team you're standing up, and you don't have the budget for that, and also when you do have the budget for that, you would like to buy, not build, the
Mhm.
last thing you want to do is try to understand things like monthly active rows, predict gigabytes of data transfer storage
Mhm.
costs. You don't want to have a 400 line Excel model as to how much it's going to cost to run this, let alone the salaries that they're going to put on it. And so we get pushback on this from time to time, but I think it's an important innovation as we snap all of our pricing for our end users to revenue because it's the one number they know coming in, and
Mhm.
it's the one number we're here to help them grow. And we can't price it off of a number they don't know that
Mhm.
they're hiring us to tell them. So in pricing to revenue, we build our expansion and scale based on that. And luckily, some of the things we did worked, and clients just started to get bigger. That's the short answer as to, I mean, I guess actually that's the long answer to your real question,
Mhm.
which is we snapped pricing to revenue. We have this core thesis that if we can help people make enough right decisions in the right order, spend more on the ads that work, spend less on the ones that don't, evolve their pricing, that we can grow with those clients. And as some of
Mhm.
those companies get into bigger sizes, their needs to fold data in from sources where they have some sense of security or privacy
Mhm.
being a concern, and B, to have some sort of long-term ownership of the pipeline of data we're producing for them in a data warehouse that they own and control became a bigger and bigger need as those companies grew up, which for the people that have worked with companies here is probably pretty standard fare, right?
Mhm.
The difference being there's a lot of our value is the 1,000 things we figured out
Mhm.
that would take them 2 or 3 years or more, plus the burn rate of standing all of that up themselves.
Mhm.
And so they wanted to be able to fork their data into an environment they owned and controlled and not be in kind of this perpetual tenant lease situation, no matter what, forever.
Mhm.
But they also wanted concurrently to be able to have the benefits of all the innovation, everything we're doing every day, all the other advertisers we're working with to bring their data in. Maybe there's the simplest example is maybe advertiser A is not running ads on X or on LinkedIn. Well, they want to know what we figure out data wise for those platforms.
Mhm.
and ad wise and visualization wise, like what helps ad buyers do better with
Mhm.
ads from LinkedIn that's different from maybe Google and Facebook and things like that, even if they're not buying traffic there. And they want the benefit of all that innovation, but they also wanted all their data in their own environment that they could control. And when the bill started to get bigger, they had to go justify it to a C-suite of like, hey, we own some of this. This is in
Yeah.
our environment. And maybe we'll be able to fold this other data source that we don't want anyone to have access to. The
Got
other
it.
use case became they needed to do off roadmap stuff for us. So, for example, sometimes they started to want to connect things like HR and incentive plans to marketing, which were just never visualizations that made sense for us to go work on building.
Mhm.
But they needed an environment where they could depend on both data sets and have a stream of the data they're able to rely on. And so
Got it.
those became kind of the big three, just companies getting bigger because some of the things that we hoped would work out did,
Mhm.
wanting to own and control some of your data, and then stuff that's off roadmap or sensitive that needed to live in a proprietary data warehouse.
Mhm.
But all the while being able to benefit from our visualizations. Because what we've not done is put someone in a situation where we said, okay, here's all the data, don't use our visualizations anymore.
Mhm.
Because why would we? We've got multiple people iterating for multiple advertisers
Yep.
on all of those, and they wanted to maintain that benefit.
Okay, so basically they said, look, we want your data as a source in our own data warehouse. Give me a price that's reasonable. And you did the math and said, if we're going to give a price that's reasonable, that's predictable, we've got to change how we're loading the data. And that started the conversation with us. Did I get that
Yeah, and
right?
you got that right. And we also said, hey, what's the value of this?
Mhm.
Right? Because arguably we're sending the data off into a place that we don't have control over it. Like if they it's of course the feed can stop, but
Mhm.
from the business side, which I imagine some of the people on this podcast are thinking about, there is that blurry line of ownership of whose data really is it.
Mhm.
And that became a component to us as well of what are the ways we can move this around and provide it. And is this a high margin thing or a low margin thing? It's definitely a higher margin request.
Mhm.
And so we wanted to really look at all of our options.
Okay.
Truth be
So,
told, this
yep.
was going to be one of the things that we wrote ourselves.
Mm.
Because early days we thought it would be a control end-to-end kind of a thing. And there's probably aspects of that that will resurface at some point for some sort of strategic reason.
Mhm.
But that's kind of what started us looking into Estuary of how do we make sure if we need to start replicating data across multiple data warehouses, because as the landscape changes, I also see this as a need for ourselves that we don't want to be beholden to any one major hyperscaler cloud environment, or
Mhm.
we want the ability to rapidly be able to take advantage of some sort of incentive or some new model. Or you look at things like Grok with they reimagined it at the silicon level. And so we're going to go have opportunity. I just don't know what I don't know that is being worked on by someone that we might want to take advantage of. And so getting that portability of the data at scale became an important strategic factor.
Yep. I hear it all the time also that don't become beholden to one vendor. Make sure you can rip them out if you have to and know what that looks like. We get that a lot talking to data engineers around data pipelines. So I heard other databases mentioned. I heard Postgres early on. I think you're using a few. So I'm curious where the rule breaks, where you say, I think other people are going to be curious about Redshift and versus BigQuery and all that and the lessons learned. So it'd be fun to get into that. But you've also mentioned some faster stuff. So I'm curious, outside of the statement that, oh, we're okay for the most part within an hour. Where are you not okay with that? Are there parts of what you do for customers that need to be a little faster?
There's definitely a lot of that. Obviously, there's application stores where like
Mhm.
you can't have a Redshift query waiting for that to return to get the data you need.
Mhm.
Um, And I really like Postgres for what it's worth of my own personal preference and what I've used the most. Redshift and Postgres are very similar, but if Postgres is distributed correctly, which something like Estuary would help you replicate the data you need across all of those, it's really quick and it's pretty cheap and
Yep.
it's really efficient and effective from a structured database store. We use Mongo a lot. We have like a fairly large cluster in Mongo that we're running. We use DynamoDB from time to time, depending on the situation, for a lot of like stream processing situations. Because if you think about what we have to do, we're connecting raw data from ad sources and then raw data from CRMs, typically, or e-commerce platforms. But a lot of times you're getting like a webhook feed, right? So you have these like SNS, SQS type queues of data that are coming in that need some enrichment and enhancement along the way in a pipeline before they get pushed over as a conversion event or before they're logged effectively. So we have quite a few systems that are running that, might touch 3 different databases in the process. But most everything ends up in Redshift. I do think that's one of my like regrets in our current setup is that I was originally, because of my naiveness, probably trying to make everything fit in one core analytics location, when in reality, there's probably a lot of situations where we would have been better off to distribute amongst a bunch of Postgres or even multiple Redshift instances potentially. So yeah, we do touch a lot. I like Postgres a lot. To answer your question though, Postgres is probably what I would use the most and what we go to most often from a quick setup, fast IO situation.
For your fast enrichment as things are streaming in. And eventually it dials down by the time it reaches Redshift. And then you're moving from Redshift to BigQuery. So that's more batch as well.
That one is more batch in that scenario for that client who wanted it. I'm not writing a lot of analytics queries against those BigQuery tables, but they didn't want to deal with all the raw data and all the formatting and, so what's cool about the service and the product that we basically delivered for them with Estuary is we're delivering analytics ready tables most of the time. So like they have somewhat junior data engineer visualization type people that are learning how to do everything over there. And they're able to just take the table we deliver without having to do much else and put it into a Looker dashboard on their side.
You pre-transform it for them, basically. You set it up into their target schema.
Yeah, I've told them it's like extract, load, transform, load. It's ELTL or something in that situation for them.
Yeah.
Extract, load, transform, 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 transform. Okay, now do something with it.
Load.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're looking back at all these stages, what's your bucket list of what was great, what worked well, what you regret? Get it off your chest. Maybe you can forget about it now. But what are those kind of big gotchas? If the way I heard it said once was, if you could go back in time, if older you could go back in time and had 5 minutes to tell your younger you what to do, what would those 5 minutes be? How would you fill them?
Yeah, I think my first one would be, and hopefully this is not just me being naive, but learn how primary keys and cursors work, especially when you go implement something like DBT. So like 1 and 2 is primary keys and cursors, and then use something like DBT, which we put in the mix a couple years ago, which simplifies and everything. Like we would be in a bad spot without it. But when you use a data warehouse and a tool like DBT and you don't set it up because the warehouse doesn't enforce the primary key necessarily, you end up in some sticky situations with a tool like Estuary that's awesome, where they don't know what data to load for you, and then you're paying for 10 or 100x as much data as you would need to because you don't have that all structured. And that's still something I'm fixing in some models and systems. So yeah, there's a lot of headaches that can be saved or not had if you just have really, really good primary key cursor setups.
I hear that a lot for change data capture too.
On the customer facing product side, I didn't think of this when we kind of prepped for this, but um, the same reason we're unique, abandoning that early may have allowed us to do what we're unique at faster. So in a data visualization, we're unique because a lot of the competition is basically adding it a little bit of context in some magic way and just re-replicating the data from a Facebook and a Google and a whatever and putting it all in the same dashboard at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're rolling it up one layer. They're not doing a true analytics pipeline where they're pulling and mixing all the sources of truth from truth and like verifying it top to
Yep.
bottom, plus all the engineering of getting all of our IDs throughout all the user experience, which is a whole other thing. But I do think there's some, one of the best things we did early was these UI-less daily posts of the data, of just the rolled up data in a Slack or an email or a text message. That still, versus a dashboard that's interactive, is so highly consumed. And I think if we would have extended that playbook just half a step further and done some light loads of the source data in a dashboard that allowed us to just have a very snappy but not perfect thing, it might have allowed us to iterate on some of the front end visualization a little bit faster. So I think there is something to be said for because at the end of the pipeline there has to be a visualization that a user sees and can act on. And I think what I go back to often is there a lighter weight way to approximate what that looks like and have those product iteration design, how does this visualization work for you cycles happen just a little bit faster in a slightly higher fidelity environment and let the questions come. So it's a long way of saying I'd maybe be a little more lean at the visualization and feedback layer and let that potentially inform some of the heavier lifting and the transformation and pipeline piece of the process. And to a degree, we do that by just distilling it down to a post in a Slack channel or an email.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's opportunities to do that in your quest to get it the big production workload, everything right, you could probably save yourself some time and missteps and in some 80% first passes. So I think it's just important to remember some of that leanness on the front end, which more ETL tools make things like that easier,
Yeah. I think also when you're turning out a customer facing product, you try to make it leaner and have it fit more different users and different user scenarios as well. But it takes a lot of discipline. There was the question that came up pretty early on, even before the webinar, which was, how would you compare your different ETL tools and when do you think about using them at this point? You started with Stitch and then you went to Fivetran, which clearly was a safe bet when you're getting started and was one of the early vendors. It sounds like you got in there with early pricing too. But today, when you think about it, and you're looking at new sources, for example, how do you choose which one to use? And then another related question was, and could you narrow it down to one? Like, could you actually use just one tool? Are you happy with what you have? Could you use one? Are you good with having a mix that gives you kind of a best of breed choice depending on what your needs are?
Well, I'll let Chase give the long answer, but I don't think we would try to narrow it down to one tool. But we do see this as a thing that we want to be constantly scanning the environment and picking the best tool for the best application.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a thing I kind of came to accept would be a perpetual reality of being good at the piece of the business we're good at. So I've never tried to get it down to one. I'll let Chase answer the rest of your question.
I think the only way to get it down to one is if we build them all ourselves, because there's no tool out there that has every connector we need, which is why we have 4 or 5 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So the only true way to do it is if we took it 100% in-house and had the staff and data engineers to just manage that and build it all. And you would have some advantages and some proprietary insights there, but you would spend a lot of time rebuilding everything that's already been built and figured out,
Yeah.
the same offering that we're giving other people. So the way I look at it right now, if I get a new data source request that we don't have already standardized, I literally open up Fivetran portable Estuary as my starting point, and I just
Mhm.
plug the source in L3.
Mhm.
If Fivetran has it, I get 14 days of free data. So I typically will do a sync there so I can get all the free data and look at it and decide what's going
Free
to look
sync
like.
too. I get it.
It's free.
Yeah.
So I look there and to get an idea of the structure. I've also noticed different ETL providers have different schemas, and sometimes the way somebody extracts the data fits better. For
Mhm.
example, Portable tends to do much flatter tables
Mhm.
than Fivetran does,
Mhm.
which is good sometimes and bad other times.
Mhm.
I really like using Portable with Postgres, for example. So if it's a workload where I feel like I don't have to run it through Redshift, I typically will use that as an option. And then Postgres has much better like JSON extract tools than Redshift does. So you can store
Mhm.
JSON data in a row and you can pull it out that way. So it really depends on like how nested the data is, because sometimes those really nested data sources, Fivetran's going to charge a row per every nest that they end up
Yeah.
unnesting and putting into
Yeah.
1,000 tables. And then you have to have 6 DBT jobs that are running just to tie it all back together into
Mhm.
the flat analytics table you needed for the
Mhm.
visualization anyways. So that's kind of how I like alternate between the two ends there. If it's anything database to database, I don't even bother. I just go straight to Estuary because it's
Mhm.
faster
Mhm.
and it's easier and very predictable. So most of our like anything that's Redshift to BigQuery, I do there. I've been doing more Mongo to Redshift sometimes when you do that, and I'll run that in Estuary. And then if I can get the powered by Fivetran component to work with Estuary's API, I probably would actually move most of those workloads over
Mhm.
as well. And I I probably bug David too much in the Estuary Slack channel about a lot of things.
No,
And I
no,
know that's one thing we've
it's
talked
never
about.
enough. It's never enough. We've seen
That's
that
one thing we've talked a
conversation.
lot about. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's probably a thing that could be replicated at some point as
Yeah.
well.
One can hope.
So I don't know,
Um,
do you feel like that, did I miss any parts of the question there?
no, I mean, I've seen others have a long tail kind of strategy. They have a couple different vendors, and I know you guys are going to find a new vendor and get all excited. And so I'm looking forward to seeing who it is, who's next. But I've often heard Portable mentioned as a long tail. And historically, there have always been some long tail vendors that build connectors to just about anything. And they're just a reality that you need them. Sometimes data integration vendors would license them. There were two or three that were in the business of just OEMing to other vendors. And we haven't seen that in this business yet. So we'll see. We'll see if it happens in this round of data integration tools. I can't stop a podcast without asking the AI question.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask, um, what's your thinking on AI and where do you think it's going, both with your business and your product?
Well, there's a fun version of it to answer on the advertising side. I just created, whilst dipping in and out of an on-site and a plane this week, 5 creators, AI avatars,
Mm-hmm.
and roughly 100 variants of a video
Mm-hmm.
based on some scripts that were also created from AI. And there's this possibility to build a very powerful loop in our business.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tremendously exciting to think about the generative side of it and then reacting to that with data that we're able to collect in a way that others can't.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, a lot of the heavy lift starts to be on the deep intelligence as to what are the elements of a creative, of an ad or a video, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which hook was it? Which, if you think about, I can take a single 1,500 character script and I can have that with an AI human that at first glance in your news feed looks as real as any other influencer in 45 minutes. I could have as many of them as are in their library of possible creators, and I can mix and match their voices and that's just one tool. And we all have had whatever AI toy we're excited with at the moment. So there's a really fast possible feedback loop there. And because of that, there's a lot of metadata around the creative that we want to start to unpack. What are the elements of this that are driving a click or a cost of click or a cost of acquisition, things like that. On the pipeline side, you said, I can't wait to see what new tool you guys are going to be excited with next. My hunch, and what I started trying to push Chase and the team on, is I think we will probably start to go back to more of the building our own AI bots to quickly help us assemble connectors. And I think if there's anything that's on the horizon, it's not going to be somebody that's figured it out and maintained it as much as it's going to be a method of prompting the code that understands that it's kind of going to be a paired AI programmer for the data engineer that helps them to quickly build and react to those kinds of things. So today, when we have the meaningful conversations, there are some, how much longer would it take? Is it really worth it? How do we ensure quality? But, when I first started buying ads online, I don't think I had an iPhone, and that wasn't really that long ago. So when I look forward to the future, I have a hard time believing that we're not going to be able to more quickly compile data models and code with some sort of intelligent co-pilot that we're able to build and train to help us to do this better. That's probably the technical AI side of it that I think we're all thinking about. I don't know if that disrupts ETL providers' businesses, or if there's a better way that we all, we figure out how to let those new developers work in there. So of course, that's kind of the big direction that you're thinking on that end. But we could just do none of that and focus on how do we more quickly do the feedback loop from the type of data we provide, knowing the performance we know of, really truly how profitable or not profitable was something, and a higher accuracy rate of a good decision, and letting that feed the next generation of creative. Even if a human's very involved in the process, they just have a lot of leverage. So I'm curious to hear Chase's answer to the AI thought experiment.
Yeah. My first answer is I think we're going to get around a lot of the customer-facing analytics from a self-serve perspective, just with AI-ready data. So if you think about if you gave your data schema to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you want to play with, and you give it some example rows, it can pretty quickly write up like data dictionary, what's in there, what kinds of fields you can expect. Tons of tools do that automatically, right? I think what we're going to start to see is if you use AI to help you summarize some data about your data, that you'll be able to feed those two things together and have it write efficient queries. And we played with the tool, was it TextQL, that basically connects directly to your data source and it writes the queries on the behalf of the user. I think a lot of users want to go in Slack and say, like, how are my campaigns doing? Right? My advertising campaigns, and have it give you back, Iron Man Jarvis level, hey, the campaign you launched yesterday is underperforming and the one last week is overperforming by X%, and blah, 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 right? I think that's where people are going to want to get to. In which case, do you really build standard visualizations other than, maybe a standardized report, a PDF that gets sent out to execs or whatever it is that's needed? Like, you probably always have both, but in a world where it can quickly spin up a React chart on the fly, and it can be correct, assuming you can get all the hallucinations out of it, I think that's an interesting way where this serves the end user from a customer-facing perspective. I've also played around a bunch with, I don't like the custom GPTs as much as Claude's projects, but that idea. And if you give it a sample set of code of like SQL files or DBT models is what I've done with it, you can get pretty accurate on a first try if you ask it to go make something similar. So I think there's like a reduction in data engineering work, just as probably any other code situation with a co-pilot, where you can stand up a bunch of these little projects and give it the source files and have it spit out really pretty accurate. Like I did that with a CRM. We're building an LTV tool that's pretty cool. And I wrote all of it for the first one. And then I put all of those files into Claude and I said, here's the new schema from the second CRM that's a little bit different. Like, go do this.
Mhm.
And I think I built the second one in like an hour. And the first one took me like 8.
Yep.
So I think it gets to be pretty cool. Especially if Estuary and other tools start to put that in the mix there, and you say like, I want to handle all these transformations automatically on the fly, and
Yep.
you can do more there. So there's definitely going to be a lot of like I don't know how all the RAG architecture stuff ties together, but there's going to be like a new database style vector store
Hmm.
that we're going to need to push data in and out of really quickly. I think from the
Hmm.
pipeline perspective is the main way this goes. And you're probably going to use AI to categorize your data for AI in the
Hmm.
future to like make this all function and tie together nicely.
Yep. So
And
I first I
you
was
go
worried
deeper and
about,
deeper.
yep.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, first I was worried about actors because it sounded like you were just completely commoditizing them, with all these contracts that
I
people are
mean,
negotiating about.
influencers for sure. Like
Yeah,
someone to say like 5 seconds of, hey, check this out. Yeah.
yeah. And then they've completely lost all their IP. And now it almost sounds like the grunt work of data engineering is going away too. Um, and I've seen some of those SQL tools, the SQL generation, and even the analytics pipelines where they kind of figure out how to navigate and do some ad hoc and point you in the right direction, so you can say, no, that looks like an interesting anomaly. Let's go drill down on that. Um, yeah, it's easy to see where that's going uh, pretty quickly because people are getting some reasonable results as they train their models against what more and more people are doing with when they correct the SQL queries. So it's all really cool. But you were saying,
I was just gonna say, I think it's that thing that won't change. So along with everything Chase said, I'll give you another example. We're now generating a lead and using conversational AI to write the messages back and forth to text with someone. Like the Turing test is well past.
mhm,
And I think you're going to see just this need to ingest a way bigger window of emotional data. And then at some point, AI talking to AI, you
mhm.
know. But what I wanted to do is actually ask you the same AI question. What's the themes of what you hear during this podcast of where's the edges of the map? I mean, is everybody kind of in your experience saying we're going to use code to build connect or use AI to build the code to build the connectors so this gets easier and faster?
I think from what I've seen, once you have the APIs for connecting to something and you start getting the data, uh, there is more and more AI being used to figure out what the schema is. Today we do schema inference, and we get pretty far along with that, even without AI. AI is going to take that further and kind of make uh, the basic data management a lot easier. But I also think about this like the cost of IT versus the cost of business. The productivity we're getting as we build this stuff is minuscule compared to the productivity that businesses get from whatever you're using AI for that they're trying to automate. So these projects that are using RAG or some combination of RAF, now that we're able to start fine-tuning models a little bit more easily, is going to dwarf any kind of productivity gains we get for data engineers. It'll make data engineers work faster, but the big benefit is still building these projects out that generate those ads dynamically and
Mm-hmm.
get improved conversion rates, because that's what's leading to better conversion rates on ads that lead to more revenues. Those revenue gains will dwarf anything we're talking about that's improving the lives of data engineers. So I'm excited about what's happening on the data engineering side, but I know that the real money is what all these companies are trying to do with AI, with advertising, with marketing, with support to generate the right answers so people can get more self-service on the support side or whatever else they're doing. So
Just
that's
have to
my
stay
short
tuned on
answer.
this.
I think that's right.
So on that note, before all our jobs go away and we have to figure out what we're doing next, I think that's all the time we have. So we probably should start working out what we're doing in our future. Andrew, Chase, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you, Rob. It's
Thank
been
you.
super fun.
Great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hearing what technologies you do try out next. So maybe we can do a sequel on that. No pun intended. If you have any other questions, feel free to comment online. Make sure you follow us on LinkedIn as well. And please ask questions. That's how we pick our future topics for podcasts as well. So with all that, thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.